In this video, I will guide you through my process of painting on copper panel. The panel I paint on is 8 by 10 inches gallery panel from Artifacts. It has warm metal semi-reflective surface, and the actual value of the panel is a bit lighter than you see on the video. I paint on copper only when I want to leave the bare metal visible, so I will explain most important differences between copper and any other surface. First, I don't want to touch unpainted areas. Even gentle touch of the finger will leave a stain on the surface, and removal of paint will tarnish it as well. It is why I did the drawing first and transferred it using Roomber transfer method to ensure that I will not accidentally paint outside of the figure. The transfer method is the same as for any other surface. You can find the link to a short tutorial in the description, as well as the link to the normal speed recording of this process. Second thing, due to reflective qualities of the metal, I need to make sure that the surface is not too dark or not too bright. It is very difficult to judge the values properly when the surface is dark or light. We need some sort of medium value surface. We can adjust the value of the surface by moving the light or putting something dark or light next to it, so it will affect the reflection. As you probably noticed, I did some premixes prior. Just general group of values: darker and warmer shadow, lighter and neutral shadow, warmer light halftone and colder halftone, which is slightly lighter. The goal of the first session is just to cover all areas with paint, so it will become a foundation for actual rendering in the next session. It means that the color per se is not so important, only value and general temperature. Another important thing, when you apply your first brush strokes, especially if they are light in value, the metal will shine through and everything will look a bit orange or pink. Don't worry if it happens. Just keep covering all the areas with opaque paint and blend strokes into each other to create even and smooth surface. I don't use garlic or shellac here to increase the adhesion, because I want to avoid any potential mess caused by it. I just paint directly on copper and wait for the first layer to settle properly. For that I use lead white for the light premixes, and I add Venetian medium into dark, so all mixes contain lead, which is important for the first layer to settle properly into copper. If you wish to avoid using lead white, you can just add a bit of Venetian medium or Italian varnish to all your initial premixes. You can find all information about mediums and paint and materials in the text description to this video. But let's talk about the process itself. I started from the eye sockets and glabella, the bone between the eyebrows, because it is easier for me to start from the center. I choose different values for the big planes, and I use changes in temperature to suggest the local color. As I mentioned, everything has a pink tint, but my main focus is to be as accurate as I can, especially near the outline, and to leave no gaps between the shapes. For that, I constantly look at my panel from different angles to notice metal reflections among the brush strokes. On the right bottom corner of my palette, you can see Venetian medium. I constantly add it to the mixtures. To talk about the brushes, I use soft brushes, mostly Sables and some of long filbert cheap synthetic brushes. The sizes are rather small, and the shapes, yes, like long filberts and long flats are the best for this task. And I found that it is better to use soft brushes, so bristles or like medium softness, they will not work as good as really soft ones. After filling the shapes in the face, I use dark mixture to fill in the hair and the light values for the neck. So the initial value range is unfolding, and I can see how the design works in its most basic form, described by the flat shapes of almost the same color, just with a slight changes of temperature and value. The darks are as dark as I see them, and the lights are lighter, so I will paint over them during next session, and I will use transparency to create soft and complex gradations. For strong local color areas, such as lips, I mix cadmium red into my halftone premix so I can indicate the notes of strongest color already. In the areas where the white dress is visible, I've decided to paint the skin first and add the actual dress on top of it in the next layer. I see that the skin appears a bit darker under the dress, so I separate the areas by painting the shoulders darker. It will help me to find the edges later, and it will also help me to show the light dress properly. My plan is to glaze the transparent whites, so I will create the lightweight effect of this dress. Now, when all basic shapes are filled in, I've decided to start modeling. So I add more lights and more halftones, and I also see that the dark side of her face has some red tint due to reflected light. So I've decided to add some cadmium red into this mixture as well. So like just basic, very basic and general modeling of the form. What is really important now is to keep everything very flat. So I don't want different areas to have different thickness for the next layer. It will be easier to paint on top of a smooth and unified surface. But you can see now how eyes, for example, they have no form. It's just an indication of different shapes. Some areas they have the sense of form, while others are just still the same. And anyhow, as I mentioned before, it is very important to leave no gaps between the brush strokes. So we use different angles, look from different directions, just try to find all these little reflections of the metal. And to close this session, I just need to smooth things up, just make things flat and even, and all I need to do is just to let it to dry. I start a new layer by oiling out carefully the surface. I apply walnut oil gel only inside of the figure, so the copper in the background remains untouched. As per usual, I start by mixing something dark. I mix some neutral dark first, and immediately I create warmer variation of it so I can balance between the temperatures. You can see two mediums on the right side of the palette. Transparent is walnut oil gel and the milky one is Venetian medium. Diluting the paint with the gel, I can use it as a glaze, so I add some darks inside of the eye to form the shape of it. The eyes are most flat at this stage, so I feel like I need to model them first. Also because it is natural focal point and I will return there over and over during the process. I use the same soft long filbert brush to apply the paint and to blend it in, as well as to model the form gently by moving the paint. I constantly squint my eyes, so I don't see the details and I can focus on the general representation of the eyes. All the edges are soft at this point. I also try to solve some problems of the drawing as I go, trying to define smaller shapes now and also to find better relationships in the features. In the delicate process of portrait painting, we are gradually solving drawing issues, so I prefer to build the big forms first and paint smaller with more precision later on top of correct big shapes. You can see how my brush strokes are smaller now and they look almost as hatches. I follow the same logic as if I was drawing with pencil or charcoal, using direction of the strokes to indicate the flow of form and to add visual variety in the skin tones. The second layer is most relaxing for me, especially if the first was done properly and there are no big drawing mistakes to fix. If you struggle a lot with likeness or with drawing as it is, try to invest more time into the first layer. Transfer the drawing first, paint slowly, squint your eyes often and check how your painting looks from the distance. With practice, you will find your way to create solid base for the rendering and modeling the form. As second layer is building up, I start to expand the color range of the skin tones. I add more blues to the highlights and look for the greens in the transitional halftones. Some areas are still flat, so I try to model the form looking for three-dimensional representation. And if you want to follow along and paint your version, there is a thoroughly edited, almost real-time version of this video, which you can watch with different speed and navigate using chapters. Now you can see that the halftones of the second layer are darker than in the first, and in this case I am building darks on top of the lights, which helps me to keep skin tones saturated. Keep in mind, if the colors look washed out in the lights, it means there is too much of white in the mixture, and we need to paint slightly darker. And the white of the dress helps us as well to see that even the lightest values in the skin are darker than the values of the laces of the dress. By scumbling lights into the shadow and adding darks on top of it, I show softness of the light and define the shape of the shadow better. There are reflected lights and darker accents which I want to represent. Adding reds to the side of the neck helps me to maintain integrity of the colors, since I did the same to the side of the face before. I try to mix inside and around my initial low chroma pool on my palette. I want to make gradual and subtle steps both in value and color. The skin is too delicate and light is too soft to paint with strong contrast. When the values of the neck look more correct, I can now crank up the lights in the face. For that I use lighter mixture, and at the same time I increase the thickness of the paint there. I use more paint, and also I am adding Venetian medium to build up semi-transparent impastos in the light planes of the forehead, the nose and the cheek. I also jump back to the darker side of the face to refine the design of the shapes and make better transitions. It is very important to squint your eyes now to check if the big forms are still reading the same way as on reference. Now you can see the moment when I don't like the outline in the neck and I have to make a decision. Either paint over, but it will make the neck eventually wider, or just to erase that unlucky shape. I went for the latter option, and first I erase it quickly with a Q-tip dipped in the Gamsol. But it leaves unpleasant stain, so I came up with the idea of expanding the hair shape and covering the part of that stain in this way. Was lucky this time, but it's better to keep focused and maintain the outlines properly. Now it's time to continue the modeling of the forms and adding more details. I soften the shadows where needed and make halftones darker if it helps to describe the form better. Adding more chromatic light colors such as Latin yellow or King's blue, adjusting the shapes of the irises of the eyes and modeling the right eye to match it with the left one is bringing this painting closer to finished state. When we paint on such rigid surface as copper, we can practice brush application and blending. The copper is very smooth and allows us to paint with maximum precision. The flow of transparent paint is the best here, and it's really easy to add thicker areas. I recommend to paint on such rigid surface if you want to paint something smaller in size, and use the canvas for larger pieces, at least where subtle drawing and attention to details are needed. Another important aspect, you don't need to use a lot of paint, so when painting on copper, I tend to use most precious pigments. The same with the brushes. I don't use many, but I keep them fresh, holding the shape, providing maximum of control. Synthetics are okay, but they lose their shape pretty fast. Sables maintain the shape way longer, and you can load more paint even to smallest sable brushes. They hold it nicely. Not in all the countries sables are available now, so in such case just use synthetic substitutes and replace them more often, and it will be fine. Now it's time to paint the dress. The skin tones of the shoulders are dry, so I can apply transparent glazes over it without fear of smudging everything. The lead white I mix here with Venetian medium is a bit yellowish in color, and it is not as bright as titanium. So if you use titanium, I suggest to mix it with tiny bit of cadmium yellow pale or lead tin yellow to get rid of unnatural white chalk appearance. Anyways, I mix it with a medium to create transparent creamy mixture, so the bottom layer will remain visible under the brush strokes. With blending brush I soften the glaze to make it feel more like lightweight cloth, and now with a sable brush I apply dots of mixtures on top and add more thickness to the seams. When I see that everything is in place, I mix dark brown mixture and add a bit of medium to increase the flow, and using long strokes I paint the cast shadows. They add to illusion of the cloth and separate the dress from the rest of the body. When I paint the clavicles, I try not to over-model the area, so the face will remain most elaborated part. My main priority is the cylindrical appearance of the clavicles, and with just some hints of reds on the top planes. The rest of the second session is mostly revisiting all the areas, refining the drawing, adding details, and gradually building up the lights. I want this painting to retain visual freshness, and it is why I don't rush with blending of everything, especially in the face. Technically, we can finish this painting at this stage, but I want to work on it a bit more, to let it dry and paint another semi-transparent layer to achieve soft but at the same time painterly look. You can see now how I touch the surface gently with a clean round sable brush to flatten the strokes and prepare the area for the next session. Sometimes it is not easy to explain the way of applying so many brush strokes and how it should just lead to proper representation. So I highly recommend just to watch and to observe the way of application and build your own methods of doing such things. I use palette knife to add the highlights in the eyes. It is the best way to achieve really sharp edges, and as far as I can see on my reference, these highlights are going to be the sharpest edges of the painting. So to conclude the second session, I paint on top of generalized first layer with both transparent and opaque application, depending on the area. I build the illusion of the form both with values and with thickness of the paint. I add more colors, especially in the transitions and local color areas. I make decision about sharpest edge, darkest dark, and lightest light, and I make sure that the edges are mostly soft and there are no big issues with the drawing. The third and the last session begins as previous one, with oiling out of everything except for the metal itself, and I use walnut oil gel as usual. Walnut oil takes a bit more time to dry than linseed oil, and it means I can use very little amount of it and the surface will stay wet until the end of the session. Since the second layer has dried thoroughly, I can see now that some areas in the hair are still very transparent. We can even see the lines of the drawing. So all I do, I just mix dark hair mixture and apply thick opaque darks with a sable brush. I will repeat again, such brushes are essential for this method of painting, mostly because I can control the edge and the shape of each of my brush stroke. Generally speaking, everything is more or less correct, so I can focus on temperatures and colors now. I mix colder light halftones for the skin, mostly for the neck area, and I apply it on top to balance the color and at the same time to increase the sense of form. When skin tones are dry, it is easier to see which color is missing or which area requires more attention, so I add more colder highlights and I continue blending and rendering the subtle forms of the muzzle of the mouth, the lips, and especially in the transitional halftones. At this stage of painting, I don't squint anymore and I zoom into my reference image to see how can I paint the planes in the light, which values are almost the same. It means that I need to mix the same value but with different temperature or different hue. You can see such areas on the lighter side of the face, especially in the cheekbone area or on the bottom planes of the face. I switched to the chest and clavicles for the last time to add bluish highlights and reddish local color accents, and to make sure that the area doesn't look flat. Near the end of the session, I spent more time in the focal point, final blendings, additional highlights, and more colors like those beautiful greenish eyelids. When the painting is done, make sure it dries in a dust-free area. And I also recommend to wear cotton gloves when you need to carry the panel, or to move it into or out of the easel. When the painting is dry, I cover the whole panel with varnish. I use GumVar, which means I can protect the painting as soon as it is dry to touch. I varnish bare metal areas as well as sides, since it is a gallery panel and the copper continues to the sides. When I need to ship the painting, I don't wrap it with plastic cover as I will do it with other panels. I use glassine paper instead. The varnish on the unpainted area is too fragile, so the plastic can ruin it. The glassine paper will protect it properly. Finally, I add reds to the cheekbones and final impastos in the lightest planes and the painting is technically done. The whole process of actual painting took around 6 hours. I've edited the process and sped it up just a bit to make shorter but at the same time thorough video version. There is no voice, just background music, so you can use it as real-time visual illustration of the process. By using YouTube chapters, you can quickly navigate through the whole process and to jump back and forward to see certain moments. Hope you will find both of the versions helpful, and let me know in the comments below if you have any questions.